But, in reality, as a government employee myself, I can tell you that it's not necessarily the people. It's not the people that are the enemy. It's the system. Basically, the whole exercise of government and politics in general is a whole bunch of people trying to cover their own asses. And that's exactly what the people in that IRS building do every day. They try to cover their asses and, do what the system tells them to do. So in that sense, his attack is misdirected.
Yeah, let me go ahead and tell you something about my own past. Before moving to Argentina, one of the jobs that I had before finally ending up working at a sort of a backroom news processing office. What I was doing was I was working at a call center, taking inbound calls, customer service, for the interim program before Medicare Part D came into effect, right? And I'm sure you've all heard about the Medicare Part D prescription drug program, which helps out with some of the costs of prescription drugs, but it has this big donut hole where the people are responsible for their own costs, and it's still a lot more money than most people can afford, and there are a lot of people who have to go without prescription drugs that they need. And the program before that, the interim program that they put in place before that, for a couple of years, was called the Prescription Drug Card Program. And I don't know if you guys have, like, at the local supermarket there, like, you sign up for a card with the local supermarket, and you get some discounts that you couldn't get without the card, and maybe they have like a point system or something like that. I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about.
No, I always tell them to go screw themselves when they try to foist those on me.
But you know that it exists.
Yes.
Yeah, they have that there as well. Okay, this is basically the same thing, but with pharmacies, and it's government funded, right? So basically, people would call in and have me help them out with something that they could actually do on the website on their own, but it's, a little bit complicated, especially at Medicare age, right?
Right.
To use the website.
They're having senior citizens go to a website and do this stuff?
Yeah, see, that's why they had the call center, so that they could have somebody do it over the phone for them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But basically, it was like, you'd say, okay, where do you live and what drugs do you take, right? And different pharmacies would have their own drug card with different discounts on different drugs, right? So you'd have this big list of drugs that you had to take, that your doctor prescribed for you, that you needed in some cases to live, or in some cases to extend your life and not have a heart attack, or important medications, right? Pain medications, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, urgent stuff.
You would get a discount on some of your drugs, but not all of them, because you would almost never have all of them covered at the same pharmacy. You see what I'm saying? And you couldn't have a drug card for the different pharmacies, so it's not like you could go get a discount in one place, then go drive across town to the other one. No, you only had one. You only had one place where you could get a drug card for one pharmacy. The discount was government sponsored, and it was only like 20% or something. So basically, the majority of people who called, that 20% discount on some of their drugs wasn't enough to help them. It wasn't enough to make it so that they could afford all of the drugs that they needed to take. And if you had an income which was below the poverty level, then you had an additional discount, and that did help people. But the people who were above the poverty level but who were still not able to afford their drugs had to go without. And then the people who were rich, who had, millions of dollars or whatever, they had the same discount, and it was just like a big government handout to them and vicariously to the drug industry. And, I was working there. I knew that. And, people were pissed because they couldn't get the drugs that they needed to literally live, okay? And if one of them was like, well, I can't, I'm in horrible pain, I'm dying because I don't have the drugs I need to live, I'm going to go blow up this place, I wouldn't have been surprised, but it also wouldn't have been my fault.
Yeah, it's a good case in point there.
And of course, we didn't tell them where we were. A lot of them asked, and we weren't allowed to say.
Well, I think that was probably for your own safety, just because of those kinds of scenarios that you were discussing at that moment.
It's all right. All call centers are in the Midwest or India.
I think it's interesting because, when I deal with somebody from a call center, I'll often ask them where they're calling from, and most of the times they'll tell me. They'll even tell me the city. I mean, if I've been pleasant to them.
Some of them tell you a city to tell them, but it's not necessarily the city that they're actually in.
I recognize that may be the case, but I think in a lot of cases it is.
I mean, I worked in one here in Buenos Aires, and I was telling people that I was in Miami.
In Miami, right. How much did they pay for that? Probably not a lot.
About $250 a month full-time.
One of the other things that I found interesting about his letter, just like as kind of a small sidelight, at one point he talks about how there was a series of base closings that affected him. And I think that, once again, I think that's another example of a point that I've made many times about how, we don't take the ripple effects of, these sort of closings seriously, because I think it makes perfect sense that people go nuts trying to fight base closings all the time because, it is a jobs program to the people who are in that community. If we took that whole notion of relocating and retraining people, making sure that they got into other places more seriously, then I think, we could soften some of the problems. I mean, this guy probably wouldn't have been nearly as mad at the government, for example, in general, if some sort of provisions were made for, getting him into something else that would have been, productive, maybe even slightly less lucrative. But if he viewed the government as helping him with that process, he'd have a whole different feeling about it.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, we need to... It's an unfortunate matter of fact that the military-industrial complex comprises a very large part of our economy. So if you cut defense spending by a great deal, what you do automatically is you take away a large amount of, base demand in the economy, and that will exacerbate a poor economic situation. If it already exists, and perhaps create one in the first place. I mean, that's just basic economics. And so the sensible thing to do would be to, obviously close these bases, but then, earmark the money toward productive ends, and then, once having established that, sell out the assets. Or, use that money for other kinds of economic development, have an economic mitigation program.
Exactly. And I mean, I think a lot of times, if you're, stopping a factory, that's producing a particular piece of military hardware, I mean, what you need to do is you need to have a plan, not just to stop that plane or, whatever, toilet seat or whatever you're making for the military. You need to have a plan for taking those people who are relying on that and giving them another form of gainful employment. Maybe that it becomes a matter of retooling the factory so that the factory produces something different, something that is useful in the non-military industrial complex part of the economy. And viewing that as a reasonable expenditure. I mean, I know we want to have our savings immediately. That's why we're closing the factory. But it's not really a savings if all we're doing is kind of dumping these people back into the economy without a lifeline. What we're doing is we're eliminating one social ill of like spending money on like military hardware that we don't need, and creating another where we're dumping a lot of people with highly specific skills, but with no way of really utilizing those skills into the economy.